Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and I swear, boys, after today, I hope to never really be talking about AC Shadows, but to be real with you, it's been a whole day, and yesterday I made a review of the game. I played a whole chunk of it. I gave my thoughts. I really talked about it from a gameplay perspective. And today we're going to talk about the side of Assassin's Creed Shadows, that crazy controversy side that I really feel doesn't have to do much with the actual gameplay of the actual game in question. Assassin's Creed Shadows has been such an interesting game covering it that it feels like everybody looking at it has sort of become an anthropologist or a Japanese culture expert or somebody that really has a lot to say about what gaming should have. There's been a lot of people jumping in at this one video game, basically looking at it from the perspective of Ubisoft's possible final game, right? If this game doesn't succeed, Ubisoft as a company may actually cease to exist, or they may just have to sell this IP off to other people, which it kind of already seems like that may already be bubbling. But this isn't necessarily looking into Ubi's financials. I made a video about that in the past. I highly recommend you go check it out just to look at where Ubisoft as a company is right now. But Assassin's Creed Shadows come out, it seems that people are playing it, it's reviewed pretty well, and obviously, I don't necessarily recommend the game just because I don't think it has a lot of what Ubisoft, I think it follows the tropes of a Ubi open world in the future, which means probably pick it up on a sale. I do recommend, however, you go get our merch at someordinarygamers.store. You probably have seen me talk about this in a couple recent videos, but I didn't really stress on the fact that it was actually a limited time run, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, this merch is only here till March 31st. It's got a cutesy little design of my corrupted face and my own little VMs, and it's got Linux commands on the actual side, so you'll never forget if I happen to convince you to the magical cult of the penguin. And because it's our own merch, it also supports our channel directly as well. Recently, videos have also been hit in our algorithm. We've been age restricted, things like the deep web browsing series. And I feel like for a lot of people who want to support the channel and, push that kind of content a little bit more forward in the schedule, supporting stuff like our merch is absolutely something I highly do recommend. This stuff is, again, on sale till March 31st. So if you're interested, definitely get that mailing list. Definitely head on over to someordinarygamers.store and definitely pick up a hoodie or a coffee mug or even both. That said, let's head back to the video. I wanted to look at some of the interesting controversies where apparently in the news it seems that the Prime Minister of Japan has actually responded to a question asked in the Japanese government about AC Shadows. So for anybody that has no idea, you can actually watch this stuff for yourself. Again, it's entirely posted on the internet to see, but a quick understanding is a Japanese counselor, Hiroyuki Kada, had actually went up and asked, "I fear that allowing players to attack and destroy real-world locations in the game without permission could encourage similar behavior in real life. Shrine officials and local residents are also worried about this. Of course, freedom of expression must be respected, but acts that demean local cultures should be avoided." Now, obviously, if you haven't understood this, Assassin's Creed had a massive controversy where the one of the main characters, Yasuke, ended up walking into a Japanese shrine and fucking shit up entirely. Now, I'm not a Japanese person, I don't practice Shintoism, but from some of the people that have discussed it to me, this would be like walking into a mosque, I guess, and, kind of just basically breaking shit. It would be like walking into a church and breaking stuff. It's a religious area, it's meant to be treated with respect. And I can understand it. Even in games like AC Mirage, where I don't even think you can destroy anything in the mosques in Baghdad. I also think that if that isn't allowed there, probably shouldn't be allowed in the Japanese, in feudal Japan, right? Or whatever they're rendering out in this situation. And generally speaking, when it was announced to me like that, it made sense. Assassin's Creed is a franchise where obviously doing illegal things is not necessarily permitted, or morally bad things. Because, it's a game where if you kill a civilian, the game will warn you, hey, this ancestor never did that, you shouldn't be killing civilians. And I'm sure if adding in or patching out options to destroy sacred, temples, sacred, areas, that isn't something that shouldn't be, that isn't something that surprises me necessarily. Now, I wanted to look a little bit deeper into this, and the Prime Minister, Ishiba, actually in Japan, responded to this question, and this is what they had to say. How to address this legally is something we need to discuss with the Ministry of Economy, Trade, Industry, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, again, per IGN Japan, defacing a shrine is out of the question. It is an insult to the nation itself. That's pretty heavy. But then more context gets added. When the self-defense forces were deployed to Samawa, Iraq, we ensured they studied Islamic customs beforehand. Respecting the culture and religion of a country is fundamental, and we must make it clear that we will not simply accept acts that disregard them. And I guess it was important enough to the point where even Assassin's Creed slowly had patched this out just a little bit. The day one patch for the game had these actual notes added. Again, players no longer are getting stuck inside movable objects after dodging forward. Well, I'm glad that isn't happening. But of course, beyond all of it, citizens without weapons no longer bleed when attacked, reducing unintended blood spill in temples and shrines. Tables and racks in temples and shrines are now indestructible. And yeah, you can imagine how this would be patched out. Ubisoft kind of responded to this, and it makes a lot of sense. Japan is a country where obviously after COVID, when they opened themselves up for tourism, was a country that, they had to worry about IRL streamers. If you ever followed the IRL streamer phenomenon in Japan, you would realize that cultural disrespect is kind of a worry for the Japanese society. Not just nuisance streamers in their own country that are actually making things annoying, but people from overseas coming in causing a nuisance. For Japan, they don't want to see any of this shit happening at a shrine or again, a very culturally significant place, which is understandable. Most countries are like that. Most countries should be like that. So when asked this question, obviously it's how the Prime Minister reacted to the situation. But it makes me wonder if the politicians here have actually even played Assassin's Creed Shadows. Because again, if you played the game, you would realize that the shrines, it's actually beneficial, if not near needed, for you to pray at every single one of them, be respectful at every single one of them, because being that in the video game, you get knowledge points, which overall increase your character's level and allow you to get better abilities. So you actually have to be respectful. You are incentivized to be respectful if it means completing the game with all of the skills attached, right? And again, with other people who actually are in Japan, like Jeffrey Hall, who's a researcher and somebody who specializes in contemporary Japanese politics, Hall says that Japanese politicians are free to ask any questions to the Prime Minister, even ones that are unrelated or completely frivolous. Hall claims that the politician who asked Ishiba about AC Shadows is just seeking attention to improve their own career prospects. So yeah, literally in the middle of anything in the court, you could be talking about a budget meeting, and some guy's like, so what do you think about that Grand Theft Auto 6? And the Prime Minister is like, yeah, I guess as long as you're not breaking shrines. Anyways, let's get back to the budget meeting. That's really what it seems like this situation was, and it kind of blew up into this whole scenario, which realistically you shouldn't have even needed to. But it didn't stop a lot of these 7 million subscriber news channels. Oh my god, 7.1 million and 3,000 fucking views. Jesus Christ. Ubisoft's latest game has sparked outrage in Japan, with Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba calling it an insult to the country over its depiction of Japanese culture. Yeah, I don't think he actually even said that entirely based on the quotes that we have read on the channel. But again, you can feel free to do research yourself in this situation. So there was one report apparently where Ubisoft was apparently going to start suing people that were harassing the developers or sending violent threats to the developers of Assassin's Creed Shadows. Now, normally I really don't care actually about this. I think that if you are somebody unhinged to be sending violent threats or actually harassing, again, somebody over digital software, you probably should face some level of legal consequences. But again, this basically became people looking into something known as an anti-online harassment plan. So reportedly, the company had a dedicated team on standby monitoring networks such as Twitter, YouTube, and Reddit, and ready to act quickly in case of a targeted attack, offering psychological and legal support to employees who may be targeted. Apparently, Ubisoft is so concerned about backlash that it has even advised developers not to post on social media that they work at Ubisoft to avoid harassment. Now, I think not liking a video game is totally fine, and again, I've been critical of Ubisoft, and I've been critical of this game, and never once have I seen any legal paperwork in our emails about this. And I don't expect to, okay? At the end of the day, the people developing this game are not necessarily anyone that I have an issue with. If I don't like a game, I just don't play it or recommend it. I don't go out of my way to tell people, yeah, maybe we should be making fun of these guys or harassing them. I think the definition here is pretty like valid. It's if you're sending violent threats, if you're actually, harassing people outside, the scope of just criticizing this game, right? Like, is Ubisoft going to sue the fucking prime minister for, again, insinuating based on some of these wild out of context quotes that Ubisoft is Ubisoft is like, they produce this culturally destructive game? I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think a company like this will reach out. But if Ubisoft does decide to shut down any form of criticism or content ID people based on valid criticism of a game, that is obviously not something I or anybody should be a fan of. But obviously, I'm not going to be sympathetic to somebody who is actually going out of their way to harass people that have developed this video game, because at the end of the day, it's simply just a video game at the end of the day. You can choose to ignore it or play any other game. If you don't like AC Shadows, here's a game called Xenoblade Chronicles X. I would highly advise you, instead of spending your money on this slop, buy this instead. You can buy Xenoblade 1, 2, 3, X, whatever. It's still better than any Assassin's Creed game in recent years. One of the best RPGs out in the world. You're free to spend your money on actual better peak games, not games that are, well, Ubisoft games. Now, the other bit of controversy that came out of this was apparently AC Shadows was censoring itself. So this one comes from like Grums, for instance, who's basically got like the biggest hate boner for Assassin's Creed Shadows from a real cultural perspective. And while he's spending more time complaining about this than I would say focusing on his own game, Emater, who I feel he needs to really be obligated to his actual paid supporters for, he goes, I heard they disabled the gore in Assassin's Creed Shadows for Japan. If so, wonder why. So he shows this clip of like Yasuke running around, like basically going out of his way and fucking absolutely dismembering a dude. Now, I would look at this shit and say, whoa, that's based as fuck. This game is M-rated. It's cool. That's what I expect from my feudal Japanese video games. Well, Grums is talking about censorship in Japan, and it's interesting to bring this up as if, like, Ubisoft is capitulating when you're leaving out the context that Japan censors basically anything gore-related. Now, why does Japan necessarily do this? Well, you have to kind of look at Japan's history. Now, in Japan, there is something known as the Zero system, which is their version of ESRB. So if you get an A rating, you can basically be any age and play a game. B is for 12-year-olds and above, C is for 15-year-olds, D is basically for 17 and above, which is the M rating for the ESRB side, so for North America. And if you get Z, that's 18 and above. Now, typically over here, this would be relegated to extreme violence like Manhunt 2 or straight up adult games. But in Japan, Assassin's Creed ended up getting that zero Z rating. Now, in Japan, they ended up getting that Z rating. And of course, Ubisoft Japan posted this, where again, the quick rough machine translation of this comes out to, regarding Assassin's Creed Zero Z, which is sold for Japan, there are differences in some in-game expressions because the content complies with the regulations of the examination body. So, items that can't be switched off from the game have been removed. It is always impossible to cut off the neck and limbs of enemies while playing. The expression of body-cutting surfaces have changed. Expression of some Japanese audio played in the overseas version has changed. So yeah, they removed dismembering fucking people, okay? And the reason why they do it is because Japan's history regarding dismembership is a little insane. Japan is a country that has a lot of dark criminal actions that have happened. For instance, one of them was the Kobe child murder. For anybody who doesn't know, back in 1997, a 14-year-old was arrested in Japan for the brutal slaying of a child. So again, just a quick understanding of it too, it was a very, very grisly event, but one of the actual notes written in red pen, stuffed in the mouth, identifying the killer as Sakakibara, was a note written, "This is the beginning of the game, try to stop me. If you can, you stupid police. I desperately want to see people die. It is a thrill for me to commit murder. A bloody judgment is needed for my years of great bitterness." So yeah, it's insane, right? Like when you start to read some of this stuff too. Police commented on the style of the killings was reminiscent to the Zodiac murders in the late 60s in SF. So it is a fucked situation to look at, and the aftermath of it led to Japanese politicians like Shizuka Kame calling for the restricting objectionable content, stating that movies, for instance, lacking any literary or educational merit, made just for showing cruel scenes, adults should be blamed for this. So it really was, look at the media surrounding us, like movies, like video games, like music, for instance, right? Kind of similar to like how a lot of like conservative politicians or lawyers like Jack Thompson in the United States pointed the finger at games like Grand Theft Auto as being the moral destruction of society. Now, just off of this is not something that I believe is the definitive nature, the definitive reason why Japan censorship really became like exacerbated when it came to violence, but this is just one major crime in the country that obviously major crimes shape the way culture goes forward, right? It can be a setback in a lot of things. So a quick way to show you Japanese censorship is through a channel known as Censored Gaming. This is how Resident Evil 7, a game released like 8 years ago, was censored in Japan. So to give you a quick idea, right, the American version of this game, if you look very carefully at it, has your main character reaching into this severed head to get a key. Now, in the Japanese version of the game, that key is actually located next to a head that isn't severed. The gore has been removed. Now, Kyle, one of my good friends who speedran Resident Evil 7 for a while, said that he specifically ran the Japanese version of the game just to bypass the actual animations and the time it would take because of the censorship that the Japanese version had introduced to the game. So yeah, Japan isn't not known for censoring gore. They've done it for a long time. So to specifically kind of single out Assassin's Creed Shadows or to call this out, and without looking at the actual context surrounding it, is just, again, it's people who are farming the controversy for clicks rather than being objective about the situation and looking at this stuff, you know, with actual care. Now, one of the other big things about this game was the romance stuff too. For anybody that has no idea, Yasuke, again, the main character for this game, one of the main characters, is a black samurai that was the retainer, apparently, to Oda Nobunaga, okay? One of the most prominent figures in Japanese history. Now, in this game, he has a few romance options as well, too. One of the romance options actually has Yasuke in a relationship with a non-binary person. Now, in this entire situation, I've realized and been taught that in, ancient feudal Japanese culture, there's been a actual surprising bit of homosexuality. And again, I'm not an expert on the subject. Again, when it comes to romancing in a video game, I often don't care. I don't even romance in a video game, okay? It just doesn't really matter to me. But mostly romances in video games have to be sought after. This reminds me of the controversy back with Mass Effect 1 where like people were like, the conservative media was angry. They were like, whoa, I can't believe this game allows you to have lesbian sex with a blue Asari alien. It just makes no sense. Make it make sense. It reminds me a lot of that where like, again, reading things like a black samurai in a relationship with a non-binary person, upside down emoji. And of course, it's literally something you have to seek out. If you play the game in canon mode, where again, the game makes the choices for you, none of these characters get into relationships. But this is literally somebody speedrunning their way to getting fucking offended, which is exactly what I've seen with this title right here. Now, obviously, look, the Black Samurai in Japan, I'm sure people can fight over the turf wars with, but I'm going to say from the perspective of if I was Yasuke, the fact that a company that is basically saying these games are all inspired by historical accuracy, it doesn't really seem like there's any form of historical accuracy, when down the road, one of the other actual like romantic options is Yasuke being with Nobunaga's sister, okay? One very prominent lady in Japanese history, Lady Oichi. He is literally also in this relationship. You know, it's a problem for Assassin's Creed when they decided to go with a real, actual figure, Yasuke in this case, and put him first and foremost into this game. And this is another thing, taking other historical figures and like just rewriting like fucking history just to make them actually fuck on camera. It's like, these are all things that could have been avoided, but it seems like the writers are just actually rewriting Japanese historical, like, Japanese history for the sake of it. And you could argue that they've been doing this since the first Assassin's Creed game, but this is like insanely egregious. It's to the point where, I'm not personally like offended, but if I was a Japanese person and people were just rewriting my country's history like this, I'd probably raise an eyebrow or two. I think arguably the Lady Oichi might have been a bigger hit just because these are actually two like figures. Whereas Yasuke getting into a gay relationship, I mean, I personally can't choose to get angry at it because it's like, if you're seeking that out in the game, something totally avoidable, then honestly, brother, it is literally your fault for jumping into the offense train right there, okay? You chose to get hit by that. But yeah, honestly, Assassin's Creed Shadows has been such a massive, controversial game. And for all, in my opinion at least, for all the wrong sort of reasons, right? Again, this is a game where people are more focused on the culture aspect of it, more so than just criticizing it for being a sloppy game. Look, I've seen people defend this game as if it was like the next coming of Jesus. Like, it's one of the most visually impressive games, which, yeah, it looks good, but I wouldn't say that it's like mind-blowingly amazing. At the end of it, I would say that this is a 7.5 out of 10 Ubisoft game, which carries the same issues with the massive open-world RPG games that Assassin's Creed's, the massive bloated open RPG ended design of Assassin's Creed games in the modern era. I don't think it necessarily needs this level of scrutinization, but it's gotten it, all because of, again, the culture war surrounding it, everyone involved in here that are looking at every aspect of this game and just aren't even basically being honest and saying, yeah, it's just a Ubisoft game. Like, let's move on to the next thing. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and that's all I really have to say. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.